Welcome to episode number 139 of the From the Heart podcast presented by Orange Kiwi Consulting. I'm excited for you to listen to this interview that I recorded earlier today with Dean Ian Williamson. He's the Dean of the UCI, that's University of California, Irvine, Paul Merage School of Business in Irvine, California. In our conversation, Ian and I talked about his unique experience in leading the UCI business school, especially during the pandemic. He started in January of 2021 as the dean of the business school, but didn't actually move here from his former role in New Zealand until about 6 months later. So his first 6 months running the business school, he did it remote. So all of us were working remote then. He was running a business school from thousands and thousands of miles away. So in our conversation, we talked a lot about what it was like to lead a large university remotely, how he got to know his team, how gratitude played a huge role in becoming an effective leader. He talked a lot about how important it is for businesses in the communities to really play a large part in their communities, the significance of what impact a company can have within its community, and also the impact a university can have on the community as well. A little bit about Ian. He was appointed Dean of the UCI Paul Merage School of Business, as I mentioned, in January of 2021. Prior to joining UCI, he served as the Pro Vice Chancellor and Dean of Commerce at the Wellington Business School and School of Business and Government at Victoria University in Wellington, New Zealand. Williamson received his PhD from the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill and a bachelor's degree from Miami University. He has served as a faculty member at the Melbourne Business School, Rutgers Business School, the Zurich Institute of Business Education, the Robert H. Smith School of Business at the University of Maryland, and the Institute Teknologi Bandung, and I'm pronouncing that wrong, in Indonesia. He's a globally recognized expert in the area of human resource management. He's written many, many papers on the topic. His research has appeared in publications such as the Academy of Management Journal, MIT Sloan Management Review, Organization Science, Journal of Applied Psychology, and many others. He's been on the editorial boards for the Academy of Management Journal, Academy of Management Review, Academy of Management Education and Learning, Journal of Management and Cross-Cultural Management. He's also the past recipient of the Academy of Management Education Division Best Paper Award for his research on high-performing teams. We talked about teams and culture and what makes a great team in the conversation today. He has been recognized as a leader in education, a leader in human resource management, in team building, and so forth. So I'm excited for you now to listen to this episode of the From the Heart podcast, where I sat down with Dean Ian Williamson, the current dean of the UCI Paul Merage School of Business. Enjoy.
Hi, my name is Professor Ian Williamson, and I'm the Dean of the Paul Merage School of Business at the University of California, Irvine, and you're listening From the Heart.
Well, Ian, it is so good to see you. I think we connected, like most of us in this world these days, through LinkedIn when you first moved out here to assume the role as the dean at UCI at the Merage School back in January of 2021. So you came in right in the thick of things. What was that like to move to a whole other part of the world and assume the title of the dean of a very prestigious business school at a time when we were all locked down and you didn't get to see anybody?
Yeah, it was a very interesting one. Certainly, I must admit, when I was offered the job in 2020, and looking back, I have to ask myself, what was I thinking? Because at that time, I was living in New Zealand.
Right.
And Kelly and I were thinking, do we really want to move across the world during the pandemic? Of course, what made it even more interesting was my job started on January 1st, 2021, but because of the pandemic, I actually could not move. And so I actually did the job remotely from New Zealand for 6 months. I did not actually physically get to the United States until July of 2021. So as the leader of the organization, that was quite a new experience because, as you would imagine, from day one, immediately there were quite a few important decisions to be made with a leadership team that by and large I never met. I actually had to hire several members of my leadership team pretty quickly after I started. Those individuals I hired, I did not meet until August of that year. So it was a lot of moving outside the boundaries of what we normally thought. But to be frank, it was very successful. We were able to navigate through it. And the great irony was maybe 6 months before I started the role, I actually published a piece of research on success in virtual teams. And so when I started the role virtually as the dean of the business school from New Zealand, I actually had to go back and reread my own article to figure out
What did I say again? And am I doing it?
it was a lot going on at that time.
What would you say were there's pros and cons to everything. Obviously, the cons are probably pretty obvious, and we can get into those. But if you look at some of the positives that come from that, okay, 6 months, I don't get to walk into the office of my team. They don't get to come into my office and see me. We're not breaking bread together. What prepared you maybe better to be a leader because of that maybe you wouldn't have had otherwise? Does anything come to mind at all in that regard?
Well, I think, that particular experience of going through obviously very traumatic experience for the community. And then you add in there the new environment for me. I am not from California, had not lived here, did not know anyone here. So it was a very brand new situation. And in addition to that, you add in having to lead virtually. I think it just really focused in on several skill sets. One, being very, very deliberate and thoughtful about your communication because you don't have a lot of context when you're trying to lead through a medium like this, medium like virtual. So the words you use, how you use that time, you have to be really well thoughtful because people are going to try to take meaning from what you're saying, and you don't want them to extrapolate and end up in the wrong place. I think the other thing is the flip side of that, of course, is just listening and asking really good questions.
Yeah.
So being very deliberate about, making sure that there's no assumptions that I'm acting on as a leader. One advantage that it did give was it gave me the chance to reach out to a broader range of individuals faster than perhaps I would have under normal circumstances. So you quickly are able to get people to kind of share their different points of view, both from inside the organization and outside the organization. And I guess the last thing is, I'm a big believer that in leadership roles, we understate the importance of empathy and that you really have to understand you're leading people. You're not accomplishing tasks, you're leading people. There's two different things. Along the way, you accomplish some tasks if you properly lead the people. But in a situation like that, everyone's life is literally being impacted by this. In some cases, it literally is life and death. Everyone is having family members. And so, just being able to be empathetic to the situations that individuals are in and understand that that's going to carry some additional challenge for you as a leader, right? I mean, individuals share things with you that you perhaps weren't emotionally prepared for to deal with that day, but that's just where we are today. So you got to just handle that. So I think those are things that, I certainly, now that we're past the pandemic and you go forward, those are still equally important, but I think they just laser focused in on those things during that period of time.
It makes so much sense too. As you were talking, I'm recalling, as and thinking about as a leader and just as a team member, so much of what we learn about people is between the lines. It's not in the meeting. It's not, when we're actually in the boardroom or in my boss's office. It's when we're walking to lunch or when we're sitting at lunch or when we're socializing, for lack of a better term. We engage with people in so many other ways than just face to face on a Zoom call like we're doing right now, that we missed all of that. But you're right, we had to be so much more intentional and kind of cut to the chase. And to your point, right now, if we're doing Zoom calls all day, we can meet with 8, 10, 12 people in a day pretty easily because the minute we log off here, we log on to another. There's no driving, there's no walking to the car, there's no being distracted as I'm walking from my office to the next office. So yeah, that intentionality. And to your point, I love that word empathy because, we've all heard the Gandhi quote and all the other quotes out there about, everyone's going through something. And we knew that everyone was going through. This was new for all of us. What was it like? What was the incentive or what was the reasoning behind leaving New Zealand and coming to California? So when was the decision made? And then when did you know that, okay, I've made the decision, but I don't get to go for 6 months or a year or whatever the case may be?
Yeah. So I actually interviewed for the job in March of 2020, which was interesting because I think as I got on a plane, California was getting its first major COVID outbreak.
Oh, wow. You were lucky to get back home.
Very much so. If it had been 10 days later, New Zealand would not have, that plane would have not been able to take off. So I got back and we immediately had the shutdown in New Zealand. I was the pro vice chancellor for another university at the time. So I pretty much forgot about this opportunity because we were dealing with major challenges in the moment. And I had no idea they were even going to offer me the job. And I kind of figured they weren't going to pursue the.
If nothing, it would be delayed until after this was over. Yeah.
The world was kind of going in a lot of different places at that moment. Me
Yeah.
thinking about that job was not a priority for anybody. But as it turned out, they did offer it to me. And initially they thought if I can get there in July of 2020, that'd be great. And I shared with them that I literally at that time could not leave my house because of the restrictions because of COVID, and that there were no planes, boats, or trains or anything in New Zealand.
No way off the island.
Yeah, that was pretty much a non-starter. They offered to then move it to January, thinking by then we'd be okay. Of course, that came and that was not viable. And to be frank, when I was working from New Zealand doing this job, it was 3 a.m. to 1 p.m. Tuesday to Saturday because of the time difference.
Right.
Doing that for about 3 months, I actually became a little concerned that this was probably not going to work. And the big breakthrough was actually the vaccine. Had that not happened, I think I was going to throw in the towel.
Yeah.
And then by the time that came out, we kind of felt like, all right, well, maybe we'll give it a shot. Bought the one-way ticket from New Zealand to the United States, and it worked. So there's quite a few steps involved in that process that fortunately all worked out. 4.5 years later, it's been a blessing. It's worked out really, really well. But, those moments, you really don't quite understand what's coming next.
Yeah, I looked at that as I was preparing for this and realized because you and I, we connected, I think, during that 6-month window in early 2021 and then met obviously late in 2021 in person when you were finally here. As a family man, as you are, we've sat and we've talked before in person and online over the last 4.5 years now. What was the impact and what was the excitement level with your family when you said we're moving to California?
Again, I think the initial thought was during a pandemic. Yeah. So, I think there was a lot of unknowns. We're not from here. Definitely it was a big transition for my children and my wife. Now, I must admit, once we were actually able to get here, this is not a hardship space. Nobody ever is going to say it's a hardship.
Right. You're not. Yeah. I won't name other cities, but you didn't move there. You moved to South Orange County by the beach.
Yeah, so it wasn't actually that bad when we got here. To be honest, I think we underestimated a lot of things in the sense that it was far more dynamic than I thought, in terms of the business community, which was fantastic. We truly appreciated the diversity of the community here in terms of the various different groups that are present and just what that means on a day-to-day, and then the natural beauty. So, there was a big adjustment, but it was in a positive direction. Let's put it that way.
Yeah. So I've been hosting this podcast, weekly interviews with amazing guests like yourself for since 2019. So before COVID, during, and then now post. Obviously in studio for the first 8 or 10 episodes, and then everything went virtual like we've just been talking about. Recently, I've started up a podcast almost every day where I'm talking 5 to 10 minutes, sometimes by myself and sometimes with a guest, on the topic of gratitude. I hadn't planned on going there with you in this conversation, but knowing you the way I do and knowing that you're a man of tremendous gratitude and you have a tremendously grateful heart, that's come up in every conversation. When I just start with that word gratitude, you hear the word gratitude, what comes to mind for you?
Well, the first thing that jumps into my mind is an appreciation that, every day people do things that allow me to be successful, productive, and they do it out of discretion. It's not required of them. And, if I look through my life, there's been a lot of people, family, friends, strangers who have just shared fully with me. And that was purely because they wanted to. There was no obligation. There was no quid pro quo. I had done nothing to deserve what they shared. Yet it had a huge impact on my life. And so for me, gratitude is just a recognition of that. Someone has done something for you without an obligation that was positive, and you should acknowledge that. And, the flip side of that is the appreciation that you have when someone expresses gratitude towards you.
Yeah.
When I started off as a professor, someone shared, a stranger actually, shared something with me and they said, "Oh, I think you'll be a good professor." I said, "Why?" They said, "Well, the key to being a good professor is you have to give freely.
Hmm.
And you seem to be someone who'll be willing to do that." And that stuck with me.
I love
It
that.
was a very off chance conversation with the individual. I don't remember their name.
Yeah.
We just struck up a conversation and they shared that with me. And that's sort of been a mantra that I've had as an educator, in that one of the things that you want to do as an educator is you want to share what you know freely and wholly without expectation of return. And then when a student expresses gratitude towards you, that's an extremely fulfilling situation. It's really rewarding. It's the joy of this job. So that's sort of the thing that comes to my mind when you mention that word.
Yeah, I mean that's true. I've had a chance to teach not nearly as long as you have, but I've taught off and on for 15 years at the college level. And when you see, or when I hear from a student who is doing something in their career and they reach out, LinkedIn's made that very easy
Yeah.
as one tool. But when they reach out and say, "Hey, something you said in class that one night in January of 2008," it's like, I don't remember January 2008, but they remember. To your point, sometimes we don't remember who said something to us, but we remember how it made us feel. And certainly when you hear those students come back and say, "Hey, something you taught us or something we talked about in class led to this." When did you make that decision in your life that you wanted to be an educator? What was the process there? Who are the mentors or those that you first leaned on? You're smiling. For those that are watching, he's got a big smile on his face. So we got a good story coming here.
So I was a junior in college. I had no idea what the heck I was doing. I had been told that the best thing I could do was to go to college. Given the background I came from, I grew up on the south side of Chicago,
Hmm.
pretty humble means. I thought that sounds like a good plan. Let me figure
Yeah.
that out. Fortunately, was able to find a college that accepted me. I found a way to actually afford it, because that wasn't necessarily an obvious thing either. And I had made it to my third year, and then it dawned on me that, wait a second, I'm gonna have to graduate pretty soon.
And I don't know what I'm going to do.
I mean, they just told me the best thing I could do was go to college. No one had the second part of that sentence. It was
Yeah.
just like college. And I was a pretty brash 20-year-old,
Hmm.
whatever, And I had a professor, Dr. Wesley King, who taught me management. It was my first time taking a management class. And he was a very good professor. And I remember saying to him after class had ended, I was like, "Yeah, I got to figure out a way to get a job. I don't really
Hmm.
know what that is." And I said to him, unfortunately, this is exactly what I said. I said, "I should get your job. Your job looks like it's pretty easy." And,
Nice.
and I was like, "You kind of come to class, you dress casually." He was someone who would wear Hawaiian print shirts to class. You get the summers off, you crack some jokes, like, how hard could it be? It seems like it's a pretty easy job.
Nice.
And he said, "You think that's what I do?" And I was like, "Well, that's what I see." And he says, "Well, if you really want to know what I do, you should come to my office." And it was almost like he challenged me in that
Yeah.
conversation.
I'll show you, young kid.
And I was
Mm.
like, "Well, I'm not afraid of you. I'll come to your office.
Right.
Who are you?" And when I came to his office, he actually shared with me what professors do. And I literally had no idea. I did not know that was like a full-time job. I didn't know what a PhD was. I didn't have any context for any of this. And he was so great. I mean, just open and sharing. And I actually spent my senior year, that next year, working for him as a research assistant. And I fell in love with this idea of the academy and this idea of being able to explore questions. I didn't even know what research was. I'd never heard of this. And it just so happened that that summer I had applied under his support to participate in a program called the Summer Institute at Michigan. And this was a program designed to encourage students to pursue PhDs in business. And here I was, this kid at Michigan, University of Michigan, in the summer, studying like all day long. It was very intense. I remember walking across the grass at like 2 o'clock in the morning because I just left the library and I had my notes and my books, and the sprinklers came on and I was huddling to try to cover. And I thought to myself, like, who am I? Like, this is dying.
This is not the guy that I thought I was.
And I'm coming from the library at 2 o'clock in the
Right.
morning, that never happened. And then I'm worried about my notes. Like, what am I talking about? And I just realized, like, I love this. And
Hmm.
so that was when I decided I really wanted to do it. And I did not immediately go to get a PhD. I graduated, I worked for a while in corporate. That was a great experience. But that seed had been planted, and then years later, I came back to get my PhD, as it turns out, in management. And in fact, the first paper I ever published was with Dr. Wesley King. So it
Awesome.
was a phenomenal mentor of mine.
Yeah, you've written some papers on leadership and high performing teams as I've read through some of your research and some of your bio. I want to come back to your role as a teacher, but since we talked teams for just a second, in your perspective, what makes a team? There's always this conversation about culture. And I hear this in sports and I hear this in corporate America. Does a great team create great culture, or does a great culture create a great team? What's your take on that?
I think there's no substitute for leadership. And I don't think there's like this universal leader. There's not this person who's, can walk into any situation. I think leadership is 100% situational. Each of us have a particular capability. And the best we can hope for is that we are smart enough or lucky enough to be in a situation where what that group of people needs at that time is what we do.
Hmm.
Right? That's all you can ever hope for.
Just responding. Leadership is responding to your people, basically.
You talk about right place, right time. That is a lot of what leadership ultimately boils down to, in that, in some situations, the team or the group or the organization needs someone who can provide very clear structure, right? In some situations, what they need is someone who can provide a lot of innovation. In some situations, they need someone who provide very clear technical understanding. In other situations that's around, they need someone with high levels of skill set and empathy, right? So we as a community, as a collection, our needs, our situations change. It is very rare that a leader has equally high levels of capability across all situations. Right. And I think to appreciate that, it really goes back to this notion of a leader as a servant. You are a servant for that time, for that situation, which means there's a time before that when you probably were not the right person. And there will be a time after that where you are not the right person. Do your best when it is your time. And when people hold on to leadership, now it is no longer about serving, now it's about them, right? And in its worst form, this is a dictatorship, right? This is where no matter what the situation, I have to be in control. But this is a selfish story. And this is where you see poor performance, period. I don't care whether we're talking about small teams or companies or countries, right? That typically is a problem, because none of us have the ability to be equally capable across a wide variety of situations. So I think that the best you can do is that selection process of, are we getting the right leader with the right skills for this group of people at this time? And that body that is responsible for selecting that leader has a tremendous amount of responsibility to get that right. I feel as if, at a different time, with a different set of faculty and staff, I probably would not have been the appropriate dean for this place.
Right.
And there will be a time in the future. I mean, I'm the 12th dean of this business school. Right? There were 11 people before me, all very different from me, none of them similar to me. Did a great job. And my number one job is to prepare this place for number 13, who will likely have a different set of skills than me, because the place, the situation, the time will be different. And so trying to hold on to the title could be the worst thing I can possibly do for this organization.
Yeah, because you will be letting go at some point. I think about the work that I do in family business. Most of the great family business leaders that I know describe themselves more as a steward than an owner.
Yes.
They're stewarding they're captaining the ship today, but someone else will captain it later. And to your point, 11 other people did it prior to you. You talk about becoming a teacher, an educator. How do you how are leadership and educating synonymous in your eyes? Because you're a great leader, you lead a great organization, you're still a professor. You introduced yourself at the top of this podcast as a professor. You didn't say I'm the dean, I'm a professor. So you see yourself more as an educator. Talk about the similarities between leadership and educating.
Well, I think they're similar, but they're not always the same.
Definitely.
I mean, one of the joys of education, when it's at its best, is when the person, the student, if you like, the other party is coming to you and they're saying, I am making myself open to you to learn. And so they have to give you permission to teach them, right? That's part of the story. And there are situations when you are the leader where the people that you are responsible for, that you are leading, give you permission to teach them, right? And that's I love that, right? I have an opportunity to work with someone and I can help them develop and grow, and they've given me the permission to do that for them. That is not always the case as a leader, however, because there are situations where you as a leader, you have a responsibility to the organization that something has to get done. It must be done in a certain way in a certain time. And the parties that you need to have it done may or may not give you permission to teach them, right? I mean, they will honor the request, but they may or may not be interested in themselves changing who they are as an individual. And so you have to be respectful that those two dynamics, they can play out, but they don't always play out the same way. Like in some situations, we're trying to execute on our strategy. People love the strategy, they're intrinsically excited about it, and they're like, please help me even get better at that. In some situations, we're trying to execute a strategy. People may or may not care that much. They may or may not want to actually change who they are, but they are willing to do their job.
Yeah.
Right. And so they're going to say, tell me what you need me to do, and I will do it. Fine. In other cases where you have the opportunity to be an educator, like, tell me what you want me to do. Explain to me why. I want to learn more. So, you have to be able to balance that. It's not always the case that your job is to be an educator. You have a responsibility to the organization. In some cases, you get to educate. In others, no, you don't.
Talk a little bit. I want to get into your book, Conversations on Work, and I want to have a couple more questions before we dive into that. And there's so many places we can go in your book that I'd love to go as well. Talk about leading difficult people. Obviously, when you come into a leadership role, there might be people who thought they would have been a better candidate or maybe might not be supportive. Obviously, don't name names here, of course, but in your career, I know you've come across, as I have, people who weren't as supportive of you as the leader as maybe others were. How have you handled that situation when you're running into some difficult challenges in getting support from people that you're supposed to be leading?
Definitely an experience I've had multiple times over the course of my career, multiple situations. So I can speak from experience here. I think the first thing leaders struggle with in a situation like that when they meet resistance is, what is their authority to lead? So when you meet resistance to an idea or an activity you're trying to do, one of the first things that happens is you go, wait a second. I mean, am I the right person?
Question yourself, yeah.
You question yourself, right? And what I've learned is I work with extraordinarily smart people every day. Like, they all have PhDs. Like, they know more stuff than me in many cases. And my authority to lead is not because I'm the smartest person in the room. My authority to lead is not because I'm necessarily always right. My authority to lead comes from my willingness to take on the responsibility of leading. And not everyone is willing to take on that responsibility, yet the organization does need someone. They have decided that they need someone to take on that responsibility. And your authority comes from your willingness to take that on. And that's the first thing. You got to understand, like, what is the basis by which I have the authority to do this? It simply is because you've dedicated yourself to taking on that responsibility that others have said is needed, right? And there's going to be days when you might question why you decided to do that.
Yeah.
But it doesn't change the fact that actually is the authority that it's not that you're right, it's the one that you're willing to be responsible for everyone else, right? And that's a very important thing to understand. The second thing you have to appreciate in situations when you're dealing with resistance is there's no right or wrong reason as to why someone does the thing you need them to do, right? So early in my career, I kind of felt like, well, I need you to do this, and I need you to do it because of X. Like, I want you to do it because of the same reasons why I'm doing it. And I begin to appreciate that's just naive, right? There are people who do a great job because they love it. There are people who do a great job because they need the money. There are people who do a great job because they got nothing better to do. There's a whole bunch of reasons as to why a person can do a great job. All you care about as a leader is, did they do what you needed? Did they do a great job? Part of the resistance you may receive is not because of the activity, but because you're also trying to get the person to do it for a certain reason, and that's inconsistent with them. And I guess the last thing is, well, why are they here?
Yeah.
Right. So if you don't want to do it, and why are you here? Right. And there's a conversation about, this is what we're trying to accomplish. You signed up for this. This is, I'm not in the military. We didn't draft you. You can leave.
Yeah.
So why are you here? And, you got to have a serious conversation about that. In some cases, that does mean the person realizes they don't want to be here.
Yeah.
because this isn't what they signed up for, and I respect that choice. But most times, what it comes out is they do want to be here. They acknowledge this is something that has to get done, and then you can also say, "Well, I appreciate this isn't the main goal for you. What else are you trying to get out of this situation? Maybe I can help that as well." So
Yeah,
those
since
are the
you, yeah.
hold on.
Yeah, you hit on it. For me, in 2005, I was given the opportunity to be a general manager of a minor league baseball team with virtually no experience. I'd never worked for a baseball team. I'd led and I'd worked in sports. Someone out there felt like I'd be qualified and they hired me. And with that came opposition from a couple people on the staff, one in particular who he really felt like he should have been the general manager instead of me. And so I sat down with him one day and went out on some sales calls with him and went out and did some work together. Said, look, I get that you feel like you might have been a better candidate for the GM job than I am. I get that. And in many cases, you probably are. However, someone in this organization above both of us chose me. And part of my job, as I see it now, is to prepare you. And, you and I may end up working for years together. You may decide you want to go somewhere else. I may decide to go somewhere else, and you might be the heir apparent. But let's spend part of our time preparing you. And it didn't last long. He chose out, to your point, your last point there. He chose to go somewhere else. And last I saw, he was leading a great organization himself and got the role he was looking for. But yeah, not everybody's going to come in and just start saying, okay, you're the new leader, Ian. I'm going to follow you. Wherever you go, I go. So yeah, we have to, so much of leadership you know, we face that opposition, not just from the people we lead, but even from outside the organization as well. So appreciate you sharing.
Ultimately, you should try to make more good decisions than bad decisions. That helps.
Right. Yeah, yeah, that definitely helps, right? Yeah,
You want to show some value in what you're able to do. Don't have a real, but be realistic. Not everything that you're thinking you want to get done is going to be a good decision.
yeah,
And just even if it is a good decision, doesn't necessarily mean that everyone is going to be excited about doing it, right? I mean, but it goes back to you have a responsibility to the organization, to the people. Along the
yeah,
way, you get tasks done.
yeah. Oh, yeah, no, I learned years and years prior to that general manager role that every great organization should have a mission statement, values, and vision statement. So I stayed up till 2 a.m. to your point of studying till 2 on campus at University of Michigan. I stayed up till 2 a.m. one night in my office in Fullerton writing out the mission, vision, and values for the organization. Went to the overnight office place that was open 24 hours, got it all printed up, laminated, framed, put up on the wall. So when people came in the next day, here's our mission, vision, and values, and it crashed and burned because I did it all by myself. I didn't get
Right.
any buy-in, it wasn't a good leadership decision, but I learned. And eventually over time, I realized, okay, that needs to come from everybody. Everybody needs to participate in that, not just have it be top down. So, all right. So you've got this book, if you want to hold it up for those that are watching.
The
Um,
conversation.
Conversation on Work explores paradigmatic shifts in how people work and what these changes mean for the future of labor. And then in the overview of the book, it talks about such things. And I'd like to maybe hit on each of these as we go. So the conversation on work, I don't think has ever been more prevalent than it has been in the last 4.5 years since COVID, or 5 years. Obviously, the complete shift. I run the UCI Merage School of Business in Irvine, California, yet I live in New Zealand. I teach, at that time I was teaching at UC Riverside and running the Family Business Center at Cal State Fullerton, both virtually. Podcast went from in-person to virtual. So yeah, everything shifted. But before we talk about that remote and hybrid and everything, which we will get to, the first bullet point that I see in the description of the book talks about burnout and mental health. We just came out of Mental Health Awareness Month, which I think should be every month. We pay closer attention to it in May because that's what's designated. But how has what we've been through in the last 5 years, and talk about it through the lens of your book or just your own background or both, most likely. Why do you think burnout and mental health are so much more prevalent now than ever before, if you do think that?
I started doing research in that space probably, goodness, 2015. It's been a while since I've
Yeah.
been focused, at least 10 years ago. It was kind of eye-opening for me, the prevalence of this. We know across the United States that at least 1 out of every 5 employees, 20% of the workforce, is dealing with some diagnosed mental health issue. And the data is pretty amazing in that number is pretty consistent. If you look at Europe, Western Europe in particular, Australia, New Zealand, So what we would say is that this is a human condition more so than any particular cultural story. Now, the triggers and the way people respond definitely varies across the cultures that we have. But I think we have to kind of go back and appreciate that work is a very important part of who we are as people. So it's very difficult for us to envision a very positive life without some sense of work where we're creating positive contributions. Like that actually enhances our mental well being, right?
Yeah.
Individuals that don't feel as if they have a sense of purpose in their life or a sense of accomplishment tend to suffer from low mental health outcomes. Similarly, though, we know that if we look at key drivers of things like depression, anxiety, and the like, one of the key drivers is poor experiences or mistreatment at work. So work itself is actually not a neutral player here. Like having a positive work experience actually is one of the biggest drivers of positive mental health, and having a negative work experience is actually one of the biggest drivers of negative mental health, right?
Sure.
So this has been a activity that has been central to our well-being more broadly, period. And I think what's happened in the recent time, and certainly in the last 5 years, is that the role of work has shifted a lot. And so what it means for us, what we need from it, how we do it, the tools we use, all who we do it with, all these things have changed. And we're kind of in flux at the moment where individually we're trying to understand how to make sense of this. And then collectively, organizations and societies really didn't design themselves with this in mind.
Right.
And so the systems are at best clunky, I think at worst misaligned. And of course, that misalignment, that friction that it creates, I think is particularly damaging for us as individuals when it's not working well. So that's what I think has kind of happened. But work has always been a big driver of either positive or negative mental health outcomes.
And that rolls right into the next bullet point, which is the difference between the remote, the hybrid, or the in-person work environments. You touch on that a little bit. I think that we were, I'm a massive extrovert, and if you'd have told me March 15th of 2020, within weeks you're going to really love working by yourself at home, I'd have said you're nuts. And I still do love. I love the fact that some days I can work in my shorts and barefoot and don't have to hop in the car and go anywhere. But I still miss that being in that environment of people. And I know a lot of introverts as well who say they really do miss people. They miss that work. I think work was meant to be done in groups and with other people for the most part. I don't know if that's what you're touching on, but how does that roll into what the impact of now that complete shift in not only how we work, but who we work with every day?
Well, I think there's sort of three big buckets here. One, the work we do has changed, right? So, I mean, I think we have to appreciate that how we create value through work is very, very different. I mean, we're a service-driven economy by and large here in the United States. We're not a manufacturing economy. We're not an agricultural economy. We're a service economy. That's like 77% of the GDP in this country. And so service work, by and large, becomes professionalized, right? And not just sort of accountant, lawyer, I mean, at all various different levels. And so that's a job where you become much more focused in on the profession of what you do than the actual organization you do it for. You yourself alluded to it, right? As an educator, you were able to work for two different universities at the same time.
Yeah.
How do we do that? Because you're a professional. Your profession is education, and you happen to have two organizations where you can exhibit your profession. That's a service economy. And so when you move to like a service economy, the notion of like the company town where everybody lived around the same factory, and no matter what you did, you were all connected because of the company, that's a very different type of setting. That is not our world today. And so where we find identity is actually very different. We don't necessarily find our identity in our employer, but the name of our employer, we find our identity in what we do, which means the feedback on how well we do it is actually very critical to our self-wealth and our self-well-being. And so, the work has changed. And so what we need from work is very different. I don't get the same affiliation benefits that I had in the past. I think the other thing is the workers have changed, right? I mean, who we do work with. We've never had a more diverse workforce. And so you're going to meet people from a wider variety of backgrounds at work today, more so than ever in the history, certainly of this country. if not the world. And, what does that mean for people? How do I find connection? How do I find common meaning? How do I effectively communicate? These are things that many of us are having to deal with in a way that we've never thought about doing before. And then, of course, the way we do the work, the tools have changed as well. So now we're doing it remotely, we're doing it in person, we're using AI, so all these things have kind of happened. And what's interesting is they've all come to the forefront literally in the last 5 years.
Yeah.
Same time. Right. And so we've never, as best I can tell, certainly in the history of the United States, we've never seen that, right? Where you've had those three foundational changes all happen at once.
Yeah, it's interesting as you're talking, I'm thinking, when you walk up to someone, if I sit down at a table with someone at a networking event, I've done a lot of those, as have you, excuse me. The question everybody asks isn't where do you work? Who do you work with? What's your work culture like? They all say, what do you do? That first question, what do you do? And so, yeah, I teach, I educate, I write, I whatever. As you're talking, I'm thinking I'm going to start changing my question a little bit more about, tell me about the people you work with. Tell me about where you work. Tell me about your employer. From that, I will glean what you do, but and maybe kind of catch people off guard a little bit too.
I mean, listen, 25% of the people who work in this country work in the gig economy.
Yeah.
They do not work full time for an employer.
Right.
They may have 2 or 3 part-time jobs or affiliations with multiple organizations.
That's what I'm doing right now.
Yeah, a quarter of the workforce. And so who you work for was a common question 20 years ago that everyone could understand the meaning of, everyone had common. That is simply not the story today. And where do we get our sense of fulfillment, our sense of mission, our sense of identity, our sense of connection? All of that is still important. We're still human. We're still social creatures.
Right.
Work is still critical in providing that. But the mechanism by which that's happening, very different. Very, very different.
What was the impetus behind this book? What, from idea to pen hitting the paper, so to speak, to getting it to where it is today?
I was approached by this publisher, The Conversation, to do a short article on the Great Resignation in 2022. And they said, this is in the news. We'd like for you maybe write an article about it. And I think they were attracted because at that time, everyone was like, what's happening? And my perspective was, this is nothing new. We've actually seen 10 years of increasing voluntary turnover, 10 consecutive years. And the only thing that made that even remotely interesting was in 2021, because of COVID, people kind of just slowed down for a second. And then, of course, we realized that the world wasn't ending, and we got 2 years of voluntary turnover in 1 year. We just jumped right back on the curve.
Yeah.
And so I laid out in this article why I felt like there were some structural changes in our economy that were generating more and more impetus, not just here in the United States, but globally, because we're moving towards a service economy, more and more impetus for voluntary turnover. So that article was well received. And out of that, they said, would you like to extrapolate on these ideas and maybe in a book around where do you think this is going? And what are some of the big factors? So I'm an HR professor. I've always been fascinated with 2 basic questions. How do people get jobs and how do companies select people? That's pretty much the only thing I've ever studied.
Nice.
And it just so happens that that's a question everyone in the world is interested in. And it also just so happens that the answers to those questions have changed dramatically in the last few years.
How so? So I'll ask that question by personalizing it for a second. I'm 61 years old right now as we record this. I am in that gig economy. I'm podcasting, I'm writing, I'm consulting, I'm speaking. I don't have one paycheck coming from one place. I've got, compensation coming from 8 or 9 different organizations where I'm working. 20 years, if I were out of work, and I was at some point within that 20-year frame, I would send out a bunch of resumes, go on a bunch of interviews, and I landed a job. I don't know if it's harder because I'm 61 or if it's just because the economy is different or because my skill set, for whatever reasons. How has that shift impacted where I am today? Is it more my age? And again, you don't have to address Ed Hart and my situation, but how is it different now than it was 20 years ago, to your point?
Man, I mean, listen.
Let's make me a case study, whatever you want to do.
Years ago, if we're being honest, some of us were still looking at the newspaper to figure out who was hiring.
Right. Or we had to look at the newspaper to see who won the White Sox game the night before. And now it's all right here on the phone.
We would wait to Saturday or Sunday to see who was hiring. We would mail something to them. We'd wait for the response. I mean, today, my students, a day does not go by where they're not inundated by requests for them to apply for a job, right? The cost of searching for a job has never been cheaper. It's almost free. You have access to information in a way that we've never seen before. And so what does that mean? So previously in the employer-employee relationship, the employer had a tremendous advantage because there was asymmetric information. They just simply knew more about job opportunities than the employee. Today, the employee, if anything, has as much, if not more information than the employer.
Yeah.
So, you can imagine 15, 20 years ago, someone offered you a job and they offered you a salary and you go, is that good or bad? I don't know. Well, it meets what I need, so I'm going to say yes. Try that with my 21-year-old who just graduated, right? They're going to say, I can tell you what the same job is being paid by 10 different companies in 10 different states and 10 different cities, and this is what I expect.
Yeah.
They have as much, if not more information than the employer for how much that job is being paid. So the information asymmetry that we used to have between employers and employees has disappeared. If anything, employees have more.
Yeah.
And so the cost of search has never been lower. It's also never been easier or cheaper for you to relocate.
Right.
So previously, if you were out of work and you were in Fullerton, the first thing you would do is look for jobs in Fullerton, or at least in the region.
Right.
Now, you're going to get an email from somebody in London. You're going to get a LinkedIn post from somebody in Boston. And the cost of you being able to move there has never been lower if you need to move.
Or I could work remote. Yeah, I've seen jobs out there all over the world, remote or hybrid at least, where, hey, you got to come in a couple times a month.
I mean, It's never been cheaper or easier to do that. On the employer side, of course, now you have a pool of candidates that is much, much bigger than you ever envisioned, right? You can literally recruit from anywhere in the world. I have lived in 4 different countries, so that would have been unthinkable not too long ago. So, I think the advances in technology, the fact that we're a professionalized workforce, because what means when you're a professional, your skill set is very transportable. You don't need a lot of ramp up time to be productive because you're carrying with you a set of generalizable skill sets. So all these things have meant that how we find a job or how employers find employees has changed dramatically. It's just a very different story than what it was, certainly when I was coming out of college.
No doubt about it. What, in those 4 different countries where you've lived, how has that diversity and where you've lived and worked molded you into the leader you are today?
I think it's had a huge impact on me. I've had the fortunate ability to live in 4 different countries, but I've worked in over 30 different countries. So being able to visit places while doing work, by engaging in my profession, I think has given me an interesting insight. My issue is around how do you attract, retain, and develop an effective workforce. That's what I do work with organizations around. It turns out that everybody wants a great job, but that definition of a great job is 100% cultural. There is no universal great job. It's all contingent upon the culture that you come from. And I'll go one step further. I think the biggest realization I've had is I had a perception of business as a set of activities you do to accomplish a particular objective task. And what I've appreciated more and more is that the activity of business is simply an expression of culture. And at its basic level, in a business school, we oftentimes talking about having a business that has a good value proposition. That's a phrase we use oftentimes in business. What's the value proposition? Inherent in that statement is the identification of culture. There is no universally valuable thing. The thing that is valuable is determined by the culture, the traditions, the preferences, the values of that community. And a business is able to thrive when it is able to meet the needs of that community. So in essence, business is just an opportunity to reinvest, to reflect, and to support the local culture. That's all it is. And so when you begin to start with the idea of creating a culturally appropriate business as the value proposition, that changes a lot of how you think about how business is done, how you think about your workforce, and how you actually engage. And I learned that lesson the most by doing work with indigenous communities in Australia and in New Zealand. And it really opened my perspective to the role of a business in society, the role of a business as a mechanism of perpetuating and reinvesting in culture, I think that's something that, to be frank, we missed. I missed, was not part of the curriculum that I was taught or was teaching when I was initially in the United States. But that has changed my whole perspective on why and how a business school should be run. I think culture should be at the center of what we do, because ultimately, what you're trying to do is create a set of activities that meet the expectations and needs of people. How can you do that if you don't know who they are?
Yeah, a great point. I started my career in HR, worked for 10 years, started at Allergan just down the street from where you are at UCI in Irvine. And I worked with a gentleman who was at the time about 55 years old. He was a mid-level manager in HR. He was the guy everybody went to in the whole organization, CEO, department heads, all the different scientists, everybody came to this guy for pretty much all of their HR related issues. And I asked him one day in the lunchroom, hey, Mike, how come you're not like the senior VP of HR? I mean, you should be, I mean, you're the guy even the senior VPs around the organization are coming to. And his response was, I have 8 kids. I never miss a recital. I never miss a Little League game. I go to all the parent teacher conferences. I'm available for my kids all the time. And yeah, I still do my job. If I was a senior VP, I'd probably miss out on a lot of those things that are more important to me. So understanding not just the culture of the organization, but then the culture internally, everybody wants something different. And that's certainly, I think a leader needs to understand that you can't just, take the cookie cutter, here's how I lead in this culture because this is what works, but also understanding that there are differences within each organization as well. And I think that's part of what makes a great leader from what I've seen is understanding that everybody wants something, inherently there's a lot that we all want. We all want to have an income. We all want to, like the people we work with and feel like we're doing a good job and that we make an impact, but not each of those is equally important to every other person.
No, and what we feel comfortable doing to achieve those outcomes. I even so, food. Everyone eats. Everyone,
Right.
that's a universal statement. But food is 100% a cultural product because certainly in what one society views as important, the price of rice in Japan. No one cares in the United States, right? But we're going to be very interested in the price of wheat and soybeans. Now,
Yeah.
best I can tell, having lived in different places and traveled, pretty much any of this stuff is going to keep me alive. And so, practical perspective, I
Yeah.
can get the job done no matter where I am. But the preferences that we have as to how we achieve that task are huge. What we're willing to pay for it, what we're willing to do for it. And so, I think if you were a food company, the goal you should have is to be a culturally appropriate business.
Mhm.
Of course, everyone's going to eat, but what they want to eat is going to vary dramatically. And if you want to really see that up close and personal, look and see what happens at any holiday.
Yeah.
And we have runs on certain things that the
Yep.
day before nobody cared about, and the day after nobody cares about.
Yeah.
But that day of turkey at Thanksgiving, for
How many whole
example,
turkeys are you buying in August, right?
people willing to literally fight each other over it.
Yeah.
So, it just, I think, really taking it back to, we have a set of technical tools we use in business and finance, accounting and marketing, all these various different things. But at the end of the day, you have a very different frame of business when you appreciate that it serves a purpose by meeting a need of a community. And that to meet that need of a community, it all goes back to the values and culture of that community. And that to me has been my biggest learning. And it has been the thing I've tried to use the most in designing what I think is a future focused business school.
Yeah. I love that. I want to get into the school here in a second as we get close to wrapping up. But one or two last questions on the book. What have you seen the impact of the book be so far, and what do you hope it will be?
I purposely wrote a book that was very accessible. It was not designed to be for an academic audience. It draws heavily on academic research, not just my own. The book has several pieces of work that are from a wide variety of scholars, economists, architects, interior designers, sociologists, political scientists. I really wanted to get a full perspective of how people are seeing this evolution. And so one is just to make people aware of the trends so people begin to understand what is happening around them. Two, I think, is to help people understand how to position themselves personally in terms of what is a viable career path. And finally, to give some tips for leaders, because to be frank, if you're a leader, you've been in a business for 20 years, we didn't educate you for this.
Right.
You're having to learn on the fly. And I think it's a little bit of upskilling that you're going to need to be successful.
Well, I love the title too, Conversations on Work. That just implies, hey, this is a very fluid thing.
Ongoing. Yeah.
Everything's gonna change. We didn't even talk on AI, and that's a big part of it as well. I mean, some people are so terrified of AI because they're afraid they're going to lose their job. Other people embracing it like I am because it's helping me do my job better. After this podcast 5 years ago, I would spend the next day and a half editing and moving things around. Now, boom, AI. I could edit this in 10 minutes. I'm not going to, but it's that quick. So, yeah.
I think the notion of conversation is that we're collectively making sense of this right now. And I just want to make sure we're very thoughtful as well as very intentional about having that discussion.
So you talk about UCI. Why should a student choose UCI?
I think there's a few reasons. One, we're in a place, we have a home court advantage, I think, here. We're in what is one of the most dynamic business communities on the planet. There are so many industries that are not just here, but the leading entities in their domain. So anything associated with healthcare, medical devices, med tech, there's no better place on the planet. If you're interested in sustainability, particularly transportation, we have everything from electric vehicles to air taxis to rockets. Like, it's here. Artificial intelligence, gaming, it's sustainable energy creation. So like, we have these amazing companies that are here and they work in lockstep with this university. So the opportunity for us to go from idea to application is really, it's amazing to see. And so our business school has a very strong focus on technology. So regardless of whether it's marketing, management, operations, finance, some course that you're taking, pretty much every course you're going to take is going to weave in how is technology changing the way we do that. We just had a huge event last month on fintech and how the finance sector is being upended by technologies. So there are 400 fintech firms between San Diego and LA. This is one of the epicenters that is happening. And so you have world-class scholars. We recruit from all around the world, working with some of the best students you can find in an environment that the companies themselves that are leading the way are here. It just creates, I think, a really novel situation. And oh, by the way, if you ever get tired of doing the work and you step outside, it's beautiful.
Yeah, right. Yeah, nothing wrong with the culture and the weather.
It just really is that diversity of thought and experience, I think, has created an extraordinarily innovative environment that we're able to participate in and contribute to as a university.
You hit a word that I wanted to bring up, and I forgot earlier in the conversation, that word diversity. We are in a society today, here we are, end of June 2025, where there's more diversity of work, there's more diversity in your neighborhoods, there's more diversity everywhere than probably ever has been before. I love it. I love that there's, I can learn from any culture, any ethnicity, any of my neighbors, any of my friends at a moment's, just in a quick conversation. With it has come that first three letters of diversity is also the word division. So there has been division as well. We see that probably more than we ever have before. When you think of the word diversity, what comes to mind for you that you love and embrace, and what comes to mind for you that troubles you?
Well, I mean, one is just an acknowledgement of the inevitability of this, right? So I think we just need to acknowledge this is the world we're in.
Yeah, it's never going to be, it's only going to be more diverse.
It is definitively that. And, and I think we have to acknowledge that this is the world we're in. And then there's a decision. Will we embrace that world or will we run from that world? I think the division is about that, right? I mean, will we embrace that reality and what it opens up for us? And of course, embracing that means we individually and collectively have to retool.
Mm-hmm.
You cannot engage with a different set of people in the same way. That's just not how this works. And expect them to embrace you back, right? You can do that, but don't express the embrace to be mutual. Then the other side of that is you can run away from it. But in doing so, what you gain is a sense of comfort and predictability, but what you lose is a tremendous set of opportunities. And I think this is right this moment, globally and locally, a decision we are grappling with as individuals and as societies. I think that's one part. The second thing I would say is, picking up on that retooling, it does require us to have a learning orientation towards how we live our life, right? And we have to be willing to sort of add things on and not see this as subtraction. That's a skill. I would say that, you can only, the cart that you have in your life is only so big. As you go through your life, you're going to put new things in, and at some point in time, that means you got to take things out. Not because they're bad, it's just because you want to move forward or you want to stay still. So, I look at our situation in California, we're a majority state. There is no group that has a majority. That's
Right.
only it is not by coincidence, I think, that California is the leading innovation in the country. California has generated more patents last year than the next 6 states combined in the US. And I think it's because you're bringing together all these different perspectives. Not that the people are more or less intelligent, it's that the people are able to configure and think of different ways in which you can use information and also see a broader range of problems that need to be solved, right? Remember, everything is culturally based. And so I think that's where we are. I firmly believe, and I'll talk about the role that I think a university plays, that we have to be at the front and center of, one, acknowledging this is a great thing for our society, and two, we need to prepare people to deal with it, to thrive in that space. That is the role of a university. And it is not by coincidence that if you go back through history, you've oftentimes seen flashpoints on university campuses as societies have dealt with diversity. You can go back to the 90s where Harvard was dealing with issues around Jewish students coming into Harvard. That was a flashpoint, huge controversy. You can think about World War II, Japanese students on college campuses, big flashpoint as we come out of World War II. We were, as a society, trying to come to terms with that. You can think of in the 60s in the South, we had Black students going to universities for the first time in those contexts, and the tremendous resistance. This was a flashpoint, again, all happening at a university. You can think last year we had protests on campus around Muslim students, Israeli students, Jewish students, flashpoints. And of course, today, the diversity, equity, inclusion conversation, campuses, flashpoint. I think it's probably a good thing that universities are the flashpoints because we are designed to create an environment of conversation.
Right.
There are plenty of examples of flashpoints in other societies where they don't have universities that play this role. It usually ends with a riot and a Molotov cocktail.
Yeah.
Right. And so I think it's okay for us as universities to play that role because I think it's actually productive. But it is important for us as a society to embrace this conversation. We should not run away from it because if we do, I think we're going to be less. We're just going to be less than what we were or what we're capable of being.
Oh, and I love that too, because you don't learn and you don't grow when you're just hanging out with people who are just like you. I mean, and I don't mean that in any, language, diversity, culture. I mean, my greatest learning comes from the fact that my greatest friends come from various parts of the world. You and I both know Tam Nguyen, who runs Advanced Beauty College. He's on the board at Genesis. He's on the board for OCTA and Memorial. And without Tam in my life, I'm much less of a man than I am because of what I learned from this Vietnamese American. Without you, just the cultural differences just in my circle of friends is what makes me grow and learn every day. And I just wish more people would understand that, you're not going to grow if you just stay in your little pod. You got to get out.
Well, and the other side of that, of course, is it's never been easier or cheaper or more accessible for you to connect with a broader range of individuals. Totally. This is not the barrier. The barrier is your choice.
Exactly.
How do you accept that? And, again, I can appreciate people being nervous about things they don't understand. That's the role of education to help them be prepared. But I also feel like leadership matters, right? And so being able to support individuals as they go through that journey, that has huge implications for what the ultimate destination is going to be for you individually, how fulfilled your life is, but also us collectively in terms of what we're able to accomplish.
Yeah, I could talk with you all day. I think we're just scratching the surface and we're an hour in already, but I greatly appreciate our friendship, the chance that, we reached out to each other, we connected, we've become friends, we've been in the same room together a few times, and I've been looking forward to this conversation with you for a long time and for you to be able to, share a little bit about your story. Before we wrap, I've got a couple more just follow-up quick rapid fire questions for you, but is there anything that you hoped that we would talk about that we haven't hit yet? Anything you're working on, anything that's exciting for you on the horizon that you want to share with people, or just any area you wish we would have gone that we haven't gone yet?
No, I think we've covered off. I guess I'll end on this in the sense that one of the things that is critical for me. My purpose, my why is education has created a pathway for me that I did not think was possible, right? It certainly was improbable. And, one of the things that I'm very passionate about is increasing access to a world-class education. Certainly that is one of the reasons why I came to this university. I think any opportunity I can find to allow individuals to explore and benefit from education at a high level is something that I'm very motivated for. So I just encourage the listeners, it's the one investment that we know consistently always pays off. Education.
100%.
The track record is amazing. It's
Yeah.
far better than the stock market. It's definitely better than the price of gold. And so I always want to take an opportunity to remind people about that.
Oh, that's great. And that's a great message about education from one of our great educators. So what's next for you? You said part of your job is preparing for Dean number 13. We know that's not anytime soon, but out there beyond when Dean 13 is now there and you're off doing something else, what's on the horizon for you now and maybe 10 years from now?
Well, I mean, it's all about, as an educator, I have to also remember that I should always be a student, right? And so my big thing right now is our focus is re-envisioning business education through the lens of artificial intelligence. And so the next several years for us is we would not build this business school the same way if we did it today with artificial intelligence as a tool. And so we need to re-envision and retool what we're doing. I think that's a very exciting journey. We kicked it off this summer. We're calling it the Summer of AI. We're launching this AI training program for all of our workforce in the business school. We've made many changes in our curriculum. And so we're just starting that journey. I actually don't know exactly where this is going to end because obviously we're doing it as the tool itself is evolving.
You're flying the plane while building it. Yeah.
Definitely doing that. But that's very exciting because I think it will create big opportunities. And going back to what I said before, I actually think it's going to make it easier for us to increase access, which I'm very excited about. So that is definitely a big part of it. And I think the other big thing is continually to position this business school as a global business school. And so actually tomorrow I'm leaving for a trip to Asia and I'll visit Japan, Korea, Taiwan, and Singapore. We do a lot of different things with universities. We have a lot of alums there. We recruit students from there. And it just is about understanding that universities can play a big role in bringing communities from around the world to your location, but also bringing your location and what you do great to the world. And I take that responsibility pretty seriously as well.
Awesome. Last two questions. Number one, how do people reach you if they want to reach you or they want to learn more about the Summer of AI or what you're doing at UCI or just in general about UC Irvine, the Merage School of Business? What's the best way to get in touch with you?
Yeah, so please go to our website, Merage School, called Merage School of Business at University of California, Irvine. All my contact information is listed there. Would love to talk to you about the book. Would love to talk to you about what we're doing at the school. I'm definitely on LinkedIn. And so please reach out to me on LinkedIn. Ian O. Williamson is sort of the handle that I have on LinkedIn. So please, I want to be in conversation with individuals. So please do reach out.
He professes what he's talking about there, folks. I saw him on LinkedIn. I saw that he was moving out here to take over at UCI. We reached out, we got in touch, and here we are on a podcast. We've had other conversations before. Dean Williamson, Ian, it's a pleasure to get this time with you, and especially a day before you head off to your world travels. So the last question I ask all my guests, the name of the podcast is From the Heart, based on my last name. I sometimes feel silly asking the question because you just spent an hour kind of answering it, but now I'm going to wrap it all up into one question and just ask you, Ian, what's in your heart?
Oh, that is a good question. I think a sincere sense of appreciation. I have, it's an honor to do what I do, and it's a privilege. I don't think anyone deserves to have this job or, you're a privileged opportunity to do it. And so I just feel a great sense of appreciation. That's what's in my heart.